Today we're going to look at why America lost the Vietnam War. There were multiple factors which caused the outcome, but before we get there, we have to quickly recap how it all came about. In the late 1800s, France colonised Vietnam and its surrounding countries, where it was then known as French Indochina. When the Second World War came along and France surrendered in 1940, Japan took advantage and invaded the area. In 1945, following the Japanese surrender, France took it back. But after a power struggle in the region, the French forces withdrew in 1954 and it was split into four: Cambodia, Laos, North Vietnam and South Vietnam. The North Vietnam being aligned with the Communist China and Soviet Union, and South Vietnam with Western governments such as the US. After 1954, it was decided Vietnam should be unified and a government elected by the people. Diem, the president of the South, opposed this and was supported by the US. Essentially, the US thought Ho Chi Minh, the communist leader of North Vietnam, would be elected. The domino theory was widely believed, this being that once one country adopted communism, the neighbouring countries would adopt it too. The NVA, or North Vietnamese Army, as well as the Viet Cong, a guerrilla army of South Vietnam, began an uprising against the South Vietnamese government. By March 1965, it became clear that the South Vietnamese military could not hold out against them and needed assistance. The US then sent combat troops, and the war began. The war itself was an incredibly brutal and bloody conflict, with a large loss of life. It raged from 1965 to 1973. No one specific factor caused the withdrawal of US troops, but a whole range of issues. The US had superior conventional weapons, but these were mostly ineffective against an enemy that employed guerrilla tactics and used the dense jungle as cover. North Vietnamese soldiers were incredibly dedicated to fighting for communism and loyal to their leadership. They were conscripted and served long tours of duty. As a result, they became highly experienced and knowledgeable about American tactics. In contrast, many of the US troops were inexperienced, not only due to conscription, but also the average age of just 19. The US troops also served much shorter tours of duty, and the personnel in Vietnam changed on a regular basis. The Viet Cong had the advantage of fighting on familiar ground. They gained an intricate knowledge of the surrounding terrain, as well as winning the hearts and minds of the South Vietnamese people. The tunnel systems, booby traps and jungle cover meant that they were difficult to defeat and extremely hard to find. The booby traps in particular were extremely effective in not only causing casualties, but striking fear into the US troops. The North Vietnamese also had the advantage of foreign support, with Communist China and the Soviet Union supplying not only aid but also weapons. In 1968, the NVA took part in what is known as the Tet Offensive. Essentially, 30 towns and cities were attacked by over 80,000 soldiers. This was a huge show of strength and convinced many Americans that the war was now unwinnable. Unpopularity of the US also grew in South Vietnam as a result of its association with the Diem government. Also, some believed that the majority of the population of South Vietnam supported the Viet Cong. The wide use of napalm and Agent Orange throughout the war, as well as incidents such as the My Lai massacre in 1968, where US soldiers killed several hundred Vietnamese civilians, certainly was a deciding factor in turning the South Vietnamese people against the US. This was the first major war to be televised and documented through the media. Images of warfare and dead or wounded American soldiers really brought the war home and shocked the American public. In October 1969, one of the largest protests America has ever seen took place in Washington, D.C. Over 250,000 people attended to protest against the war. As the war raged on, money that was promised by the government to social and economic reforms was actually diverted towards the war effort. This again caused a huge issue with the American public. Because the US is a democracy, its government rely on the population to vote them in. Because the war was so unpopular by its later stages, it became politically unviable to continue, as the government in power would not be re-elected. In 1973, The US admitted it could not win the war and signed a peace agreement with the North Vietnamese. All its combat troops were then withdrawn from the country. In 1975, North Vietnam defeated the South Vietnamese military and the country was united under communist rule. As a result of the war, the US suffered 58,000 casualties. Its South Vietnamese allies suffered 250,000 casualties. The NVA and Viet Cong, 1.1 million. And shockingly, the civilian casualties totaled more than 2 million. As always guys, thanks for watching. Make sure you click that subscribe button, leave a thumbs up or a comment below.